Got a sunburn to peel the daggers off your tongue. Young and dumb, I'm rotting like a bed sore in a cold case that's never gonna be more than scratching at the walls while you're waiting for a bullet to come. All along I've been treading in the deep end. Throw my mirror in the cupboard for the weekend. Try and put together pieces while I'm dreaming, but nothing's adding up to a thing but a hole in the head.
An opportunity here to provide leadership, support, and a voice to the voiceless. The sacrifices that we made during our service do not end here. We carry on. We push forward, and we give hope and inspiration through love, community, and support. Stay free.
Rights and freedoms in this country are absolutely everything to me because I personally know the sacrifice required in order to get them back once they're gone. So when my brothers and sisters call stand 2, be sure I'll be there.
Legacy media will play their games, right? Like, this isn't about this or that. This is about freedom, period.
The only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. Brothers and sisters in uniform, whether you're a police officer, military, check your hearts. Look where we're going. Man, wake up. I beg you.
If the veterans can't stand up and get a message across to the government, I don't know who can. I don't know. But we're going to give it our best shot. And I think we have a chance to win this and do it. But we need your help. And we need you to come, and we need you to stand too. Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll talk again soon.
Woke pirates, yes, they robbed, sold out to the merchant ships. Minutes after they took out from the bottomless pit, my head was made strong by the hand of the Almighty. We forward in this generation triumphantly. Won't you help to sing these songs of freedom? It's all I ever have. Redemption songs, redemption songs. Emancipate yourselves from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds. Oh, have no fear for atomic energy, 'cause none of them can stop the time. How long shall they kill our prophets while we stand aside and look? Some say it's just a part of it. Got to fulfill the book. Won't you help to sing these songs of freedom? It's all I ever have. Redemption songs, redemption songs, redemption songs. Emancipate yourselves from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds. Oh, have no fear for atomic energy, 'cause none of them can stop the time. How long shall they kill our prophets while we stand aside and look? Some say it's just a part of it. Got to fulfill the book. Won't you help to sing these songs of freedom? It's all I ever have. Redemption songs, redemption songs. It's all I ever have. Redemption songs, redemption songs, redemption songs.
Hey, what's up, troops? Jeff Evely, the Magnanimous GenX'er Male, back with you now on the 16th day of April 2024, and I practice radical candor. Welcome aboard, everybody. I got a great show lined up for you today. Special guest John Carpay is waiting backstage, and he is the founder and president of the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, who have been absolutely instrumental in the current fight to restore freedom in Canada. Most notably, coming from the charter application, the judicial review that was performed after the Emergency Measures Act invocation that had declared ultra vires, and is now representing our very own Eddie Cornell, founding member of Veterans for Freedom, in the lawsuit for violating his freedoms at the trucker convoy. I'm going to go ahead and say hello to everybody before I bring John in here. And over on Rumble, Chet was the first one on the board. He says, "Hi, Jeff. Hey, what's up, brother? Thanks for being with us." And Leaf Nurse is there as well. Dwayne says, "Evening, all." Dwayne, thanks for being brothers. Thanks for being with us, brother. And Shiloh is there saying, "Just in time, Sergeant Major. No push-ups for me." Well, push-ups are good for you, man. So, it's definitely not going to kill you. All right. Debbie says, "Good afternoon from Tabor, Alberta." Thanks for being with us, Debbie. Holly is here saying, "Good evening, everyone. Share. Thanks for the top cover. I do need all the help that I can get sharing this out. So much appreciated." Colleen says, "Good evening, folks." And Darlene says, "Good evening, my fellow Canadians." Good evening to all of you. Thank you very much for being with us. And I did get my knuckles wrapped by Facebook there last night for those of you who are on the stream. And we kind of cut out and then came back for a little while. It looks like they took that video down. And I'm not even sure what I said because, of course, they don't tell you. But could have been any number of things, I'm sure, that constituted whatever they said it was. It was dangerous information. So speaking of dangerous information, here is Bertrand Russell for our quote for this evening. And it says, "When asked how fascism starts, Bertrand Russell once said, 'First, they fascinate the fools, then they muzzle the intelligent.'" And I think we can all kind of relate to that. So we're seeing all kinds of that all over the place, especially when it comes to the things like, having licenses revoked for physicians and whatnot. It's just incredible. So, we're all living through this right now. Here is our meme for the day, and this is clearly IA generated because it is really good. And we have the Canadian Police coming in and arresting this man who is just sitting here on his computer minding his own business. Well, I suppose he's engaged in some dangerous conversations and spreading dangerous information. So they're coming to arrest him, and he's got his Canadian flag up here on the back, and that is where we're headed. We're going to talk to John about that here in a second, especially as it pertains to Bill C-63, the Online Harms Act. And here is a political cartoon that is in that same vein. And this is a front page news article. I'm not going to read the article, but the title is "Trudeau demands life in prison for, quote, speech crimes," close quote. And they have the picture here. It says "crushing it." And we have Prime Minister Blackface Trudeau, Klaus Schwab, and this is Virani here, our justice minister. He's standing in the front, and Joe Biden is sniffing his hair from behind, which is priceless. And Bill Gates is also in the picture along with Xi Jinping, and they're all standing on freedom, which is being crushed. That is about the state of affairs right now. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and bring John in here, folks. John Carpay, how you doing this evening, sir? Pleasure to have you aboard.
Pleasure is all mine. Glad to be with you, Jeff.
Yes, thanks very much. I gave you a little bit of an introduction there before we started, but just for anybody who doesn't know you, would you mind giving us just the quick backgrounder for anybody out there?
So I was born in the Netherlands and came to Canada at the age of 7. I grew up in British Columbia. I have a bachelor's degree in political science from l'Université Laval in Quebec City, and worked in Ottawa on the Hill for a little bit, moved back to BC. And 28 years ago, I moved to Calgary in 1995 to start law school, graduated with a law degree from the University of Calgary. And since graduating from law school, I worked for a few years for the Canadian Taxpayers Federation as their Alberta director. I ran a different legal nonprofit defending rights and freedoms. And then since 2010, I founded the Justice Center. I've been running the Justice Center. Today we've got 9 lawyers and 5 paralegals and communication staff, and we are involved in court cases defending rights and freedoms from British Columbia to Newfoundland, all over Canada. And my wife and I live in Calgary, and we've got 4 kids, 2 of them over the age of 18 and 2 of them still at home.
Well, good for you, sir. And yeah, that's an interesting background. Anyway, I was reading about that you actually were born in the Netherlands and you came here. I didn't realize you worked for the Taxpayers Association, though, because but I had Franco Terrazzano on here just a couple of weeks ago. So he's that's another great organization, and he's a pretty spectacular guy. So I thought I would just kind of start us off here, but I'm not in the habit of making my guests watch themselves on videos. But here is the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, and they say our petition travels to Ottawa moments before dropping off the 55,000 signatures of Canadians who oppose censorship. Justice Center President John Carpay pauses to share his thoughts on the Online Harms Act and Canadians' response to it. Our petition is addressed to the Minister of Justice, who introduced the Online Harms Act in the House of Commons in February, and all parliamentarians. We want to thank every brave Canadian who stepped forward and said no to censorship in Canada. So do you want to tell us a little bit about this action in particular, this petition that you guys are sponsoring now?
Well, the Bill C-63, which is colloquially known as the Online Harms Act, it's the worst, most aggressive assault against free speech in modern Canadian history. It proposes to give new powers to the Canadian Human Rights Commission to prosecute people over non-criminal hate speech. It proposes to give the federal cabinet new powers to create censorship regulations that will apply to social media. It proposes to create a digital safety commission. Watch out for politicians using safety. In the French Revolution in 1793, it was the Committee of Public Safety that chopped off the heads of more than 16,000 Frenchmen. So anyway, digital safety commission is coming. Maximum life imprisonment for the speech crime of advocating for genocide. That's speech alone. That's not any kind of planning or action, but just speaking. Advocating for genocide would get you life in prison. And then last but not least, there's a preemptive punishment provision whereby you could end up in jail if a neighbor fears that you might in future commit a speech crime.
Yeah, I was reading that in the bill, actually, at the time that they first started pushing this. And it's basically like Minority Report meets 1984. So you got the thought crime in there, and it's coming together with the pre-crime, so we can be convicted of pre-thought crime, it seems, under this bill, or if this bill were to receive royal assent. Is that about right?
It's true, and it's almost unbelievable. Like sometimes when I talk about, and I've been speaking about this at public meetings, I've had lots of interviews, and when I hear myself saying the words, I was like, is this really for real? Like you could, a neighbor could fear that you might commit a speech crime in future, and so you could be hauled before provincial court judge. And if the provincial court judge believes your neighbor has reasonable grounds for that fear, you could actually have an order to be placed under house arrest with a curfew and an ankle bracelet. And if you don't abide by those conditions, you could face up to 2 years in jail, and you haven't even committed a crime. But yeah, that's in there. It's for real. It's pre-punishment for crimes that have not been committed, which is, we have this in unique situations on an individual basis where somebody might say, I've got an angry ex-spouse and they're stalking me and whatever, right? And you can get a restraining order, but that's just on an individual basis, and that's to protect you from violence. This is not, a family law situation. This is across the board where you could be hauled into court because somebody fears that you're going to commit a speech crime in future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and good luck running for office the way the left is out there right now. I mean, they're getting triggered over anything. So it seems to me that I think as terrifying as it is, probably the biggest problem with it is it's so subjective that it leaves it wide open to abuse.
Well, let me give you an example. I'm sure you've heard this many times. We got the big debate on the transgender stuff and whether that should be pushed in schools, and if it is, whether parents have a right to know about it, et cetera, et cetera. And each and every time you hear somebody saying that, let me give you an example. Let's say somebody says it's impossible to transition to the other gender. You can get, puberty blockers and hormones and surgery, but you will never be a member of the opposite sex. We shouldn't push this stuff on kids who are uncomfortable with their biological bodies. We should give them counseling and therapy to help them to deal with that and not give them puberty blockers and line them up for surgery. Okay, those are everything I've just said. Those are opinions that a lot of Canadians hold. What's the response from the other side? Hate, that this is hateful. Yep. And I think a lot of those people, they really do believe that it's hateful. They feel that way. And so it's so subjective. You could say something and I could listen to it and go, yeah, that's not hateful. That's just an opinion. But the guy sitting next to me could hear you speak and go, oh, that's hate. So it's really treacherous if you get into this whole hate speech when hate is a subjective emotion, and hate, like beauty, is in the eye of the beholder.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that seems to be the line that they're taking. Anytime they're trying to push whatever political agenda it is right now, and they receive pushback, they start screaming, "Oh, that's hateful!" And so, if you want to protect children, then you hate gays. So,
if you want changes to immigration policy, well, then you hate immigrants. If you want changes to Aboriginal policy, maybe you think that the way that the Indian Act and the current way of doing it is bad, well, then you're a racist and you hate Aboriginals. If you don't buy into a radical feminist agenda, well, then you hate women. And it's just this is for real. You've got a big chunk of the population that thinks that if they hear something they disagree with, that it's hateful. There's no guarantee that the police officers and the Crown prosecutors are not going to buy into that same mentality and charge people criminally with hate speech based on some subjective assessment.
Right. And just to refresh my memory, so based on those subjective assessments, you could end up with a 2-year prison sentence. Is that correct?
Well, it's more complicated. So one of the provisions in Bill C-63 is that they're going to currently, if you advocate for genocide, okay, so Section 319 of the Criminal Code bars the willful promotion of hatred. That's Section 319. Section 318 prohibits promotion of genocide, and that is against an identifiable group, and that means a group identified by race, religion, gender, sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression. Not other grounds, by the way, because I get asked all the time, oh, could we charge Prime Minister Trudeau with hate speech for saying that people that are against the COVID vaccine are a bunch of extremist, anti-science, misogynists? And the answer is no. You cannot charge him with hate speech because it's the enumerated grounds. So the advocating for genocide, Section 318, if you were convicted of that, the maximum penalty currently is 5 years imprisonment. Again, that's just for saying, death to the fill in the blank group. Okay, race, gender, sexual orientation, whatever. Advocating for genocide, maximum penalty 5 years. If Bill C-63 passes, the maximum penalty would change to life imprisonment, just for saying death to the whatever group of people.
Death to America, death to the Jews.
Well, death to Americans, yes, that would be an identifiable ethnic group. Death to the Jews, death to the Palestinians, death to whatever. For saying that, now, I'm not saying you're necessarily going to get that punishment, but right now it's 5 years. They want to make it life imprisonment. Bear in mind that the maximum penalty for sexually assaulting a minor is 14 years. So this government is actually saying that to yell out death to the fill in the blank group warrants life imprisonment. Sexually assaulting a child, maximum penalty, not life, but 14 years. It's pretty twisted.
Yeah, and I was showing it on the screen there, but just for anybody who's only listening, here is the section under the bill. It says advocating genocide. So they have the 318 from the criminal code here, and it says every person who advocates or promotes genocide is guilty of an indictable offense and liable to imprisonment for life. And I guess, as is the case with everything else, like all things are subjective these days, and so. And then it becomes a question of, well, what do you, what constitutes promoting genocide? Now, and I asked this, you should know, because I'm the guy who did the video, a clip show of Justin Trudeau and all the things that he said about the unvaccinated. And I lined that up against the 10 stages of genocide. And I think that all 10 are met at this point, given the spike in all-cause mortality after the rollout. So I have to wonder if perhaps he would fall into that. But like you said, I don't think that that's going to happen, isn't it? Because of these sort of subjective standards.
The biggest impact will be the chilling effect. I don't necessarily think we're going to see huge numbers of people going to, if this passes, and it's not guaranteed to pass. When a prime minister is riding high in the polls, he has a lot of control over his own caucus. When the popularity slips into much lower numbers, if the Liberal MPs, and by the way, the Justice Centre is nonpartisan, so I encourage all Canadians, I don't care if your MP is Liberal, Conservative, NDP, Green, or Bloc, or whatever, contact your MP and ask him or her to vote against the Online Harms Act. The reason it's not futile is if the Liberal MPs hear from a lot of their constituents saying, hey, vote against C-63. We think this is an affront to free speech. We think it's terrible. If you vote in favor of C-63, we're going to vote against you. And I'm going to tell all my friends to vote against you. And we're going to try to remove you from office because we want to have an MP that supports free speech. If the Liberal MPs start to get a lot of messages like that, they're going to go back in the Liberal caucus meeting that they have, the parties have their caucus meeting every Wednesday morning. You're going to get MPs that are going to raise this saying, you better back down. You need to back down on C-63 because I'm hearing from my constituents that we don't want it. So regardless of what party your MP belongs to, you should email your MP, phone your MP, ask for a meeting, and make your voices heard.
I got a question over on Rumble, and Shiloh was asking, John, could a statement like death to all whites be subject to this law? Off the top of my head, I would say probably, but I doubt that it would go anywhere. Such a complaint would go anywhere. But by all means, sir, give us your assessment.
On the face of it, yes. If somebody said death to Caucasians or death to whites, that would be advocating for genocide, contrary to Section 318 of the Criminal Code. Now, would there be a prosecution? Well, one of the many problems we have in this country is a breakdown in the rule of law, where the politicians are not applying the law equally, but they're looking at who you are and what cause you're fighting for. So, for example, in March of 2020, when some protesters were shutting down railway lines, which is a criminal code offense, by the way, to shut down roads, block roads, it can also be a provincial offense to block off traffic in part. But Prime Minister said he wanted to meet with them, and there was no crackdown. Why? Because he liked their cause. They were protesting for Aboriginal rights, for the environment. And then you get the Freedom Convoy, for which the Justice Centre provided lawyers for the people on the ground for the 3 weeks that it was going on. And he won't meet with protesters and illegally invokes the Emergencies Act. And then there's a violent crackdown on peaceful protesters. Why? Because he didn't like their issue. He didn't like their cause.
Right.
And so what I fear is that the law would not be applied equally. And if you said death to the whites, you might see police or Crown prosecutors turning a blind eye to that and saying, oh, gee, you're oppressed. And that's not how things should run. The law should be the law equally for everybody.
Yeah, it seems to be that you need to be in the right tribe these days, and that is functionally what happens everywhere else in the world in terms of authoritarian regimes. Is it's really more like a dominant tribe that runs the show. You know, it's not a single strong man that necessarily dominates an entire country. Like he has support. He has a certain level of support, and the dominant tribe, I guess, for lack of a better term, is the progressives at this moment. And so, if it's a progressive cause that you're out there representing, then you are good to go. And I mean, we're seeing this again with these pro-Hamas demonstrations springing up everywhere. I mean, they are blocking roads. There was somewhere in Canada where they were blocking the roads, but it's all over the U.S. with the Golden Gate Bridge. Florida didn't put up with it. They seem to be dragging them away. But a lot of places we're seeing like these different like infrastructure, like bridges and roads, airports that are being blocked, and citizens are either just kind of getting out of their cars and walking around them, trying to get to their flight, or they're dragging them off the road. But there doesn't seem to be any enforcement when it comes to that. But on the other side of things, like you said, a peaceful protest like the trucker convoy, they will crack down on. Now, do you think? Because I know that you're close to that one as well. But and there's a lot of intimidation, I think, that we're seeing out there with the carbon tax protests that are ongoing. But I'm not aware of any level of brutality or arrests or anything like that thus far. So I wonder, do you think that they would get away with that again, given that there is this lawsuit underway against them already?
Well, it's hard to say. I was in Ottawa last week. And by the way, we dropped off the first installment of signatures. 55,500 people signed the Justice Centre's petition against the Online Harms Act, and we're continuing to receive signatures. I was in Ottawa anyways for a conference, and so dropped off the petitions with 55,000. It was printouts of the online signatures. But I have heard from some people that have said that they were protesting alongside of a highway, and the police, without any particular pretext, without referencing any particular law, threatened to, you were going to arrest you and lock you up in the paddy wagon unless you stop the protest. So I don't know the situation there specifically. It would depend on whether if there's some law against protesting alongside of a highway at a particular location for a particular reason. Governments aren't allowed to regulate our freedom of expression, and they can regulate time, place, and manner of us using our free expression rights, freedom of association, freedom of peaceful assembly. So regulation's okay. I don't, whether the police have wrongfully intimidated protesters protesting the carbon tax, I don't know. I do know it is illegal to blockade a highway, and I don't care what your cause is, whether it's one that I personally agree with or not. Do not stop people from traveling and from going about their business and from doing their work. Is free advice I'll give to any listeners. Do not blockade, do not obstruct, because it's about 99% sure that that's going to be illegal.
Yeah, and I think what you're making reference to there is the first clause here in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. It says, Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms guarantees the rights and freedoms set out in it, subject only to such reasonable limits prescribed by law as can be demonstrably justified in a free and democratic society. So you have freedom of movement, but you don't have the freedom to drive over the speed limit, because that would be a reasonable restriction that is demonstrably justifiable in a free and democratic society where, the safety concerns clearly outweigh the concerns around individual liberty. We saw a lot of restrictions on movement throughout the course of the pandemic. And I think probably the most famous case right now is Brian Peckford's case, that is currently before the courts. So do you think you could speak to that a little bit, just in terms of the demonstrable justification or lack thereof with respect to all of these restrictions on our mobility rights that we've suffered under over the last few years?
We've seen some very disappointing court rulings in say the last 24 months, and the judges are not properly applying Section 1, which actually requires the government, when it says demonstrably justified, that has been interpreted by the Supreme Court as meaning that you put forward cogent, persuasive evidence to really show that the restriction on freedom of association, freedom of expression, freedom of religion, mobility rights, freedom to travel within Canada, freedom to leave and re-enter the country. Anytime that government places a restriction by way of a law or a policy or a health order, then the onus is on the government to demonstrate with persuasive evidence that that particular law, that particular health order, that particular travel restriction is actually doing more good than harm. The government, and the onus is on the government. No, they do not have to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. It's not like a criminal trial, because that would be pretty hard for the government to do. They do have to prove it on a balance of probabilities, which is the civil standard, which is 51-49. Now, what many judges have done, sadly, in the last 2 years, and they did in Brian Peckford's case, they dismissed it as moot when the government itself said, we're temporarily suspending this. We could bring it back at any time. And this is after both Brian Peckford's lawyers, provided by the Justice Centre, and other lawyers as well. There was 4 court actions. 2 of them were supported by the Justice Centre, 2 of them by other parties. 4 court actions consolidated, and we put forward expert evidence, expert reports. The government put forward its experts. The government experts admitted under oath that there was no medical or scientific basis for preventing Brian Peckford and Maxime Bernier and other Canadians from getting onto airplanes. Maybe that's why the judge dismissed it as moot, because she could not have ruled in favor of the government after the government admitted there's no science behind these travel bans, saying that the only people that can fly on an airplane are the people that got the COVID vaccine. So that was a disgrace. And we've seen other judgments where they have a pro-government bias, and they just let the government, they defer to government and say, well, government said it, I believe it, that settles it. I'm paraphrasing. That's not, you won't find those words in the judgment, but that's the gist of it, is, well, the government said it, so I'm going to rule in favor of the government. So we got to keep on fighting these battles in the courts, and we have to restore the notion amongst judges that they really have to apply Section 1 strictly.
Yeah, it appears to me to be this case of cultural authoritarianism, and politics is downstream from culture, folks. It happens in the culture first, and whatever's happening in the university today is what's happening in the university tomorrow. So, yeah, that's what I think we've kind of seen is we're already in this state of cultural authoritarianism where the boss is always right, and whatever serves the regime is true, even in the case of judges. And since we're talking about, like, there can be reasonable and demonstrable reasonable restrictions that can be demonstrably justified in a free and democratic society in order to prevent harm, because that is the metric that we're trying to mitigate, essentially, like with all law. Basically, it's the guiding principle in the ancient Roman Empire was do as you will, but don't harm another. So when it comes to protests, like, go ahead, but don't block traffic, because now you're impeding somebody else's mobility rights. And when it comes to Bill C-63, I mean, I think this is why they're framing it this way. They're calling it Online Harms Act. So they've recharacterized what I would say is just butthurt, mean comments online that have our fearless leaders so deeply wounded that they now need to pass this law in order to restrict our speech in the way that I guess they restrict mobility with speed limits. Maybe not quite analogous to that. But we see a lot of the same, I guess, institutional bias from within the institutions. Here's Blacklock's reporter, and they have the title of the article is "quote unquote" apolitical. Simon likes Bill. So Marie Simon, the governor general. Well, it says Rito Hall yesterday had no comment after Governor General Mary Simon personally hosted a conference in support of a bill before Parliament, C-63, an act to enact the online harms bill. The guest list was limited to Attorney General Arif Virani and supporters of the internet regulation. Quote, "We discussed this in our Online Harms Act." Yeah, so I guess really the question at this point, and I know you're advocating for people to call their MPs. A few people have already commented that the MPs don't listen in the chats here. So if this passes, would this be something that could be open to a charter application, or where do we go from there?
Yes, absolutely. And the Justice Center is studying the legislation now, and if it acquires the force of law, we would. There's a very good chance that we would have one or more lawyers that we would support in tackling parts of it. We might take a low-hanging fruit approach and go after what I think is the worst provision from a constitutional standpoint is that preemptive punishment, that you could be hauled before a court and subjected to house arrest, ankle bracelet, curfew, restrictions on who you can contact, where you can go. And then if you disagree with those conditions, you could be sentenced to jail. That is so Orwellian that it might be the best chance of success before the courts to get that struck down. The other thing we can do in the future is to provide free legal representation to people that are getting prosecuted. As you know, Bill C-63 would give the Canadian Human Rights Commission new powers to prosecute Canadians where over non-criminal hate speech, where you could be ordered to, if found guilty, you could be ordered to pay up to $50,000 to the federal government, up to $20,000 to an individual. And the punishment is the process. Even at the end of the day, you're not found guilty, or you're found guilty, but they say, okay, well, $1,000 fine. You know, you will have lost 1, 2, 3 years of your life fighting off a prosecution, and possibly huge legal bills if you choose to get a lawyer to represent you. So the Justice Center, if this is passed into law, we would hope to provide legal representation to people that are getting unjustly prosecuted for something that they've said.
And I'm not sure if I understood you correctly there, but would it be open to a charter application right away, or would it be the case that somebody would need to be charged under the bill before they could use it as a legal defense?
Fantastic question. Generally speaking, the strongest legal cases are the ones where the person bringing the charter application is somebody who stands accused of breaking the law. Typically, generally, those are the best and the strongest. Now, having said that, you can also challenge a bill as soon as it is in force. That's after third reading and it's been proclaimed into force. As soon as it's in force, you could challenge it. And I think with that preemptive punishment provision, I think that's an example of something that could be challenged immediately, even without having to wait for 3, 6, 9, 12 months until somebody is actually placed before a provincial court judge and facing the possibility of getting punished for something they've never done. So that aspect of it can be challenged right away. The other aspects, you know, you have a stronger case if you wait until you have somebody who's actually facing a prosecution, and then in that context, you fight back.
Yeah. Okay. So it sounds like it's the pre-thought crime that kind of leaves it open for a challenge immediately, but any challenge would have more weight if there were an accused involved. Is that about right?
Yeah, I'll give you an example if you like. A number of years ago, I was defending free speech rights for students at the University of Calgary. They were peacefully expressing their very unpopular pro-life opinions on campus. Nasty general counsel for the university threatened them with penalties up to and including expulsion if they continued to peacefully express their views on campus. Right. And this dragged on for years. You know, I was writing letters back and forth, and what ended up happening was that the students were ultimately, they were found guilty of non-academic misconduct, and the punishment that was issued was a warning. Once they were found guilty, we then appealed that up through the different levels, all the way to the Board of Governors of the university. Board of Governors said, yes, they're guilty of non-academic misconduct. Then we took it to court, and then we won, and we beat the University of Calgary because the court said, well, you found students guilty of non-academic misconduct for having peacefully expressed their opinions on campus. This is wrong. It's unreasonable. Now, I think we would have lost. We could have done an earlier application. We could have gone to court in the early stages before the disciplinary proceeding started. And we could have asked in the abstract, we could have asked for a court order to order the university to allow the students to express their views on campus. I think we would have lost because the university could have said, oh, we're concerned about safety and security, and we're this or that. It's all abstract, right? So it's very loosey-goosey. It's very open-ended. So generally, you're better off challenging a law when you've got somebody who's victimized by the law by being prosecuted under it.
Yeah. I guess it helps if they have some demonstrable skin in the game to bring that before the courts. And yeah, you said something there that really, I think, kind of touched on it, because you were saying that the university said that, again, there's that word safety, like there was a threat to safety from these people expressing their opinions. And this attitude seems to be at the highest levels of our institutions across the board, because, again, here's the Governor General of Canada. Gigi Simon invites you to join us in #WeDeserveBetter. Online abuse is never acceptable, and we are taking action together. Let's create a safer, there's that word, and more respectful online world. It's not harm, guys. It's just butthurt. I'm just going to play a few seconds of this. It's only a minute long, but it's pretty unbearable. So here we go. I did show this, I think, last night, but 85% of women online have witnessed digital violence against another woman, and 38% of women have personal experiences with online violence. And again, there's this wording, right? Online violence, mean comments. 7 in 10 young people have been exposed to online hate. The effects of digital violence are heightened for people who face multiple forms of discrimination. Online abuse is a serious issue that silences voices, discourages participation in public discourse, and creates a climate of fear and insecurity.
I deserve better.
And they open it with Rachel Gilmore. I just love that. I think that is really just kind of the icing on the cake. The first person, there's this whole montage. This next guy, I'm not going to bother going through all this, guys. It's pretty unbearable. Everybody's just saying, I deserve better. And the first one up there is Rachel Gilmore, who, of course, is famous for smearing James Topp as a white supremacist while he was marching across Canada to stand for human rights. And Globalist News got sued over that one, and she got fired. I don't know that those things are directly connected, but they certainly correlate. So I think that we can suspect there is a correlation. And, since we mentioned this, I just went ahead and pulled this up. This is the video that I mentioned. I'll play just a couple of, maybe a minute of it or something like that here, guys. But here is Justin Trudeau, engaging in some very hateful speech. Oh, I don't have the sound on. So if you're just listening, I'm doing the 10 stages of genocide. First one is classification. People are divided into us and them.
The anti-vaxxers, they are putting at risk their own kids, and they're putting at risk our kids as well. And those people are putting us all at risk. Aaron O'Toole is siding with them instead of with Canadians who did their part and stepped up.
Sorry, I forgot the Trudeau warning. Thanks, Colleen.
Canadians have shown it in being there for each other. And I am not going to back down no matter how many of them show up to try and shout us down. So shame on you, Aaron O'Toole. You need to condemn those people.
Stage 2 is symbolization. People are forced to identify themselves. So the stages are classification, symbolization, discrimination, dehumanization, organization, polarization, preparation, persecution, extermination, and denial.
And that means we're going to work on vaccination certifications, on vaccination passports. And that we work with the provinces on vaccine.
Again, this is symbolization.
Certifications.
So they have to identify themselves. Okay, so you get the idea. It goes through all of those. So, I mean, here we are passing this legislation against promotion of genocide. And I guess the question is whether the unvaccinated will constitute an identifiable group. Is that really what it hangs on?
No, so Section 318, this has already been on the books for decades. Section 318 of the Criminal Code makes it illegal to promote genocide. And that has to be based on identifiable group as defined in the Criminal Code. And that includes race, skin color, ethnicity, national origin, sex, religion, age, physical disability, mental disability, sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression. I don't know if I got them all right, but there's a certain list there. So if you were to promote hatred against, let's say, bankers, let's say that you've got economic theories and you think bankers are, scum of the earth, you can promote willfully, you could say, hey, the world would be a better place without that group, and promoting genocide. But if it's not based on that, race, religion, sexual orientation list, then it's not criminal. So whatever, you can promote genocide of people that did not get the COVID shot, and it's not a criminal offense because vaccination status is not on the list of prohibited grounds of discrimination. But what Bill C-63 would do is it would increase the maximum penalty from 5 years to life in prison on the existing offense of promoting genocide.
Okay.
If I can touch on that safety theme for a minute, they're very clever in saying, this is all about children and keeping children safe. What they're hiding or camouflaging or distracting from is the fact that right now it is a criminal code offense to post online an intimate image, like a naked photo of somebody without their consent. If you do that, it's already a criminal code offense. Posting revenge porn on the internet is already a criminal code offense.
Right.
Uttering threats is already a criminal code. Whether you do it, in person, face to face, or on social media, on the internet, if you threaten somebody, it's a criminal code offense. Intimidation is a criminal code offense. Advocating for terrorism, for violence, advocating for the commission of a crime is a criminal code offense. All these things are criminal already. So when they're talking about keeping kids safe, they're also ignoring, I think the biggest thing is that responsible parents who love their kids will, or should, you restrict how much time your kids are spending on the internet and what your kids are looking at. And the first line of defense against online harms is parents. Excuse me, sorry. But if you listen to the Justice Minister, Arif Virani, when you listen to him talk, and he says, I've got 2 young boys, and, we've got safety regulations imposed on Lego, and so we need safety regulations on the biggest toy of all, which is the biggest toy in every house is the internet. I'm thinking, I would ask, are you letting your 2 young sons have unsupervised access to the internet? That's where the first line of defense comes in, is that parents should make sure that their kids are not getting unlimited time and unsupervised access.
Yeah, and I mean, even the box of Legos has a 3+ label on it. Like, you don't give it to babies because they're going to put it in their mouths and choke on it.
Is the federal government going to pass a law to make it illegal to expose your babies to Lego when it's only supposed to be for ages whatever 4 and up? Yep, exactly.
Yeah, it's already regulated. So they have this bill, and it's a huge bill, and it has a lot of redundant law in there because we've already got this stuff on the books, and it's illegal in real life, so you better believe it's illegal online. Uttering death threats, even this kind of thing. But it seems to be the case that what they're doing is they're putting all this stuff that sensible people would agree with and have agreed to in the past, because these are already laws on the books. So who could disagree with that? What do you want to harm children? And while they're doing that, they're sneaking in these like just a handful of lines there that are absolutely draconian and Orwellian, for that matter. So it's quite sneaky, isn't it?
It is. The other key aspect of C-63 that's very troubling is that it empowers the federal cabinet to pass censorship regulations that will apply to social media in Canada. And so you'll have Trudeau and company currently. And the problem's not about Trudeau. I mean, this is bad. Even if we had a different federal government, the point is not, who's the prime minister right now. The point is, do you want to give up your power to speak freely and your power to hear and listen to diversity of viewpoints? Or do you want to live in a regime where the government decides on your behalf what is true or false and censor speech? So the Online Harms Act, if passed in current form, will give the federal government new powers to censor social media and to say what they cannot say and to say what they must say. And then we're going to create this Digital Safety Commission, which will be a new army of bureaucrats to enforce the federal cabinet's new censorship regulations, which, by the way, like all regulations, they're passed without any input from Parliament. So if when the federal cabinet is developing its regulations, they do that in secret, and the public doesn't find out about it until the regulation is suddenly proclaimed into force. And then it's like, oh, here you go. Here's the new rules. And the penalties to be imposed on social media providers are so draconian that they are going to very actively make sure that they don't run afoul of the federal cabinet's new censorship regulations.
Yeah, they seem to be aiming for the downstream effects. And Professor Bruce Pardy talks about the triumph of the administrative state.
Yeah.
And it seems to be the case that what this government has been doing, and this is the case that Pardy makes, but what they've been doing is they're bringing in these really broadly worded kind of laws, and then they hand it off to the administrative state to say, you figure out the practical implication of this. And so that just results in this massive growth of the administrative regulations that really is like the opposite of the way the government should work, because the administrative state is the one that rules over us, and they are the ones who are going to get bloated and tyrannical, and we send our representatives to Ottawa to rein them in. But in this case, it seems to be that Justin Trudeau is constantly saying, we're following the advice of the professional public service. And like, that is the opposite of what you're supposed to do. And just kind of giving them all the power they could ever want. So it seems that, the Leviathan is sort of off its chain at this moment and wreaking havoc for the people of Canada. And I think what you mentioned is the chilling effect is the real kind of impact. Is that about right?
Chilling effect is the worst impact. Now, there's a silver lining on the cloud. This is a wonderful opportunity to build bridges with other people that support free speech. Different people have different opinions on different issues. And there are some people who were in favor of lockdowns and they were in favor of vaccine passports. And they are also very, very strongly in favor of free speech. So I know it's been very hard for those, the Justice Center was the first and only civil liberties organization in Canada to oppose lockdowns. Other civil liberties groups were kind of watching and, doing a little bit of analysis, but they weren't actually opposed to lockdowns. They weren't opposed to vaccine passports. So I know what it's like to have, strained relationships, severed relationships with people that are, they're just not willing to discuss facts and evidence. But this is a unique opportunity where you can reach out to people. This has nothing to do with lockdowns. It has nothing to do with vaccine passports. And so it's a great opportunity to reach out to people and say, look, there's this Online Harms Act. It threatens your freedom of speech. And, it's a good way to start having conversations with people that are not open to talking about lockdowns or vaccine passports. So we should not accept this as a done deal, because it's not. And we need to sign the petition, www.jccf.ca. Please sign if you haven't already done so, and spread the word to friends and neighbor and family. And let's mobilize against this, and let's do the best we can.
Yeah, 1,000%. I mean, all we can do is all we can do at this point. And here you go, folks. This is the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedom's website. If you just go to the top here and click Get Involved, if you just mouse over that, you can come down to petitions, and you'll find it right here. It's right at the top of the page. Stop the Online Harms Act. This act threatens freedom of expression in Canada. Canadians' online expression should not be censored unless it violates the criminal code. No Canadian should face an anonymous human rights complaint for what they have said. No Canadian should be hauled before a court or punished merely because somebody, quote unquote, fears they will say something hateful. No Canadian should face life imprisonment for their expression. We, the undersigned, call upon the Minister of Justice, Attorney General of Canada, Arif Virani, and all parliamentarians to stop the Online Harms Act. And yeah, some really great bullets in there. Now, that is another really scary part about this. Now, there are two components here to this statement here. No Canadian should face an anonymous human rights complaint for what they have said. There are two components that I find really scare me there. And one is that it's anonymous, and the other one is that it's going to go through these kangaroo court human rights commissions. So would you mind maybe speaking to those two elements of it?
So this, podcast, video cast that we are doing right now, if the Online Harms Act had passed 3 months ago, 6 months ago, somebody who disagrees with our way of thinking, has a different opinion, somebody who dislikes us, somebody who disagrees with us, they could listen to this show, and they could pick on something that you've said or something that I've said, and they could file a complaint with the Canadian Human Rights Commission and say, well, what Jeff said was hateful, what John Carpay said was hateful. They file a complaint, and they could say, and I'm a very vulnerable citizen, and I'm scared because Jeff, military background, and John Carpay, legal background, and I'm really scared, and I'm really vulnerable, and I want to be anonymous, and so they could get that anonymity status, and then all of a sudden you and I are facing this anonymous complaint over something that we said on this podcast, and we will have to spend time, effort, and energy to defend ourselves against it. We may wish to hire a lawyer, which would be expensive, so on and so forth. So anonymous complaints, that's just awful. Because part of our legal system is you have the right to face your accuser and to cross-examine your accuser, to have your lawyer cross-examine the accuser, to know who your accuser is. That's just basic accountability, and that's symptomatic of these sick kangaroo courts that they would allow anonymous complaints. It's just disgusting. Now, in criminal law, the only time you could get an anonymous complaint, you would have to make a special application where maybe it's a battered spouse is going to make a complaint against the spouse that's beating him. In highly unusual situations, in special circumstances, you can get anonymity, but not across the board. The general rule is, if you're Walmart and you accuse somebody of shoplifting, you're going to have your Walmart, sales clerk or manager is going to be there in the courtroom to testify, and it's transparent and it's accountable.
And that is, I think, a couple of things that we've been lacking for the last few years here is the transparency and the accountability, for sure. And it all sounds very reminiscent of like Franz Kafka and The Trial to me. I don't know if you ever read that or not, but it's a dystopian novel.
Kafkaesque. Yeah.
Yes, it's Kafkaesque, right? As in, basically, we're not allowed to know the process by which we are being judged, and we have to engage in the behavior in order to determine whether it is legal. So there is that chilling effect where people are just going to be reluctant to act and reluctant to speak because they don't want to find out the hard way if it's actually illegal. And you know, they're going to be drugged before these kangaroo courts. And as John was just pointing out, the process is the punishment. And so that is the kind of, I think, very, very sneaky, you know, punishments that they're bringing in here to chill speech on Canadians. So we really are kind of in this Stalinist territory. We're teetering on the brink where we're almost in this Franz Kafka novel. What do you think?
Yes, but you know what? But we're not entirely, right? Because in Hitler's Germany and in Stalin's Russia and in Mao's China and in today's theocratic Iran, theocratic Saudi Arabia, et cetera, there's regimes all over the place where you know, the discussion that you and I are having, you cannot even legally have that kind of a discussion. You can't set up a website. You cannot have a group like the Justice Center advocating for freedom. So even though it's, you know, we're in deep trouble, we're heading in the wrong direction. However, we still have our free speech rights to engage in the democratic process, to engage with our fellow citizens, and to be active and to speak out against injustice and to fight for better laws and to educate our family members and our neighbors and our friends. So let's keep that balanced perspective that we do. It is within our power to take action and to be involved in the democratic process. And as Edmund Burke said, the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. So let's not do nothing.
Yeah, 1,000%. Now is not the time for silence. That is for sure. You were just speaking to, you know, the need, I guess, for everybody to get involved, I guess, before this thing goes through. But if I'm not mistaken, this also contains language that might make previous online posts and comments, you know, open to review, I guess, or subject to this law. So even if the law were to come into effect tomorrow, something that you posted, you know, 4 years ago could land you in trouble. Is that the case as well?
I think that would be in the discretion of the prosecutors under the Canadian Human Rights Commission. If I had to make a prediction, they would probably focus on the, you know, more recent postings, but it does seem to me they could reach into the past. I neglected to plug in my computer prior to this interview, so if I suddenly disappear, I didn't hang up on you, but it's my computer dying. I thought I should mention that.
Well, I mean, I do these lives 5 nights a week, so it's organized chaos.
Okay.
Anything could happen. We're used to that around here. And I wanted to take you back to something here just for a second, because it's a thought I had, and I don't get to talk to lawyers every day. So I might as well squeeze a little free legal advice at you. But this is the Canadian Human Rights Act. And since we are talking about the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal or Commission, then I thought I would just kind of throw to this, because the prohibited grounds for discrimination that you had listed there, one that they added not too long ago, this was just prior to the Trudeau regime that this came into effect, is genetic characteristics. So this might be more of a scientific question, but depending on the jab that you got, perhaps this could apply. I'm not sure how familiar you are with that, but it is a gene therapy after all. So I wonder if genetic characteristics could apply in terms of Trudeau's, you know, smear campaign against the unvaccinated, because that would be your vaccination status in this case would necessarily be the difference between one genetic characteristic and another, at least in my mind anyway. But what do you think?
You know, you'd be the luck of the draw as to what judge you get. And if you get a judge that is open to accepting the argument that the COVID vaccine is a form of gene therapy that alters your genes, Or if you get a judge who's very deferential to government, and if then, government's going to go into court and say, oh, that's not true. And they'll just go, oh, well, okay, well, that's not true. So it's the luck of the draw. It's so hard to predict the outcomes of these cases. That's about all I can say on that.
Yeah, we really do seem to be getting some mixed results out of the courts in all of this. And they, like you said,
we got a favorable decision in January, which was great. And the Justice Center was at the forefront. We filed an application within 2 weeks of Trudeau illegally invoking a national emergency and using the Emergencies Act. We went on behalf of Eddie Cornell and Jeremiah Jost and two others. We went to court and we put these Canadians, their affidavits about their experiences with the violence, the violent crackdown on a peaceful protest, the freezing of bank accounts. We put that before the court. Later on, there were two other civil liberties groups that filed court actions as well, which was extremely helpful and a very good thing. The three of them were brought together. And then 23 months later, we got a court ruling that the Prime Minister acted illegally in using the Emergencies Act. And so that was a really good shot in the arm. We've had a lot of setbacks in court, but we see also that there is a judge who clearly, when you read the judgment, he did not like the truckers. He thought the truckers were dangerous and probably criminal and probably a bit kooky, probably racist, probably whatever. Very negative view of the truckers, but nevertheless, he still said the evidence compels me to declare that the Prime Minister acted illegally and that the seizure of bank accounts was illegal search and seizure prohibited by the Charter. And so we got that favorable court outcome. And it's a testimony to what happens when you stay active. The worst thing to do is to give up and quit. The worst thing to do is to do nothing.
Well, I think I'm just recalling the quote that you just made. I mean, the only thing required for evil to succeed in the world is for good men to do nothing, or good people to do nothing. Edmund Burke. And, this is not something that is confined to Canada either. Like we're seeing these kinds of draconian laws coming into effect all over the West. And Brazil was in the news here recently. I'll just play a minute or two of Michael Schallenberger. He's talking about what's happening in Brazil and a lot of these legal actions being taken against X. Now, before I even do that, I should point out that Elon Musk was tweeting about this, and he says X just received an inquiry from the U.S. House of Representatives regarding actions taken in Brazil that were in violation of Brazilian law. There were hundreds, if not thousands. This is getting spicy. So, at least the U.S. House of Representatives is taking an interest in what's happening here, and here is what is happening.
Hey, everybody, it's Mike Schellenberger for Public. Just a day and a half ago, it seemed like things were really starting to calm down here in Brazil. The Folha de São Paulo, which is the New York Times of Brazil, editorialized against censorship. The head of the Brazilian Bar Association gave, for the first time really, a very strong statement in support of freedom of expression and against censorship. And even the president of Brazil's Supreme Court said the conflict between Brazil and X, formerly known as Twitter, was over. People talk a big game, he said, but they don't act on their words. All of that has once again changed. Yesterday, Brazil's President Lula literally called for criminalizing lying. Given that everybody lies, Lula is proposing to give the government the power to arrest anyone he wants. Thousands of Worker Party activists came onto X yesterday to demand that I be arrested and put in prison for things I said during my testimony before the Brazilian Senate. And today, the head of X in Brazil announced that he had quit, fearing for his safety. I'm not afraid for myself. As I said on X a few days ago, I fear neither the devil nor G. Moraes, the Supreme Court justice who's rapidly turning himself into Brazil's dictator. I'm taking all necessary precautions to ensure that I can leave Brazil today safely and without being arrested. You can help, however, by sharing this video and spreading the word about what's happening here. Even so, what's happening in Brazil terrifies me. I love this country and its people. I'm afraid they're on the cusp of totalitarianism. A significant share of the left wants to incarcerate their political enemies. Respected Brazilian journalists say with a straight face that the government must engage in mass censorship in order to protect democracy. Brazil is everything that George Orwell feared and worse. The Brazilian government appears to view 1984 not as a dystopian future to avoid, but as an instruction manual for creating a new future. I might be less worried if Brazil were small.
I think Pierre Poilievre actually said that about Trudeau at one point as well.
And irrelevant, but it's not. Brazil's the biggest and most important country in Latin America. Just this week, top Brazilian government officials were in China talking about how China, one of the most totalitarian nations in the world, is a model for Brazil. Brazil's an inspiration now for European totalitarians who have weaponized government intelligence agencies to spread disinformation about their political enemies, interfere in the elections, and are implementing a censorship system to control the entire internet. The most terrifying part of all this is the marriage of psychopathic government leaders like Lula and Jim Moraes with totalitarian activists and voters. Governments have successfully brainwashed a significant percentage of the population into supporting mass censorship. Young adults here raised on social media are today more intolerant than the students in China's Cultural Revolution, who had been denouncing their teachers and sending them off to work camps where they were tortured.
And that is something that I've been saying for a while too. We seem to be undergoing a Maoist revolution, a Maoist cultural revolution here in Canada. And Mr. Carpay had just dropped out for a second there. I gather your computer is not long for this world. But it does seem to be the case, like I was just saying, that this is going on all over the West. And I'll just throw a couple more examples up here. I wasn't sure how long you were going to be there, sir, so I pulled up a couple of more. Here is in Scotland. Visegrad is reporting one of the world's strictest hate speech laws came into force in Scotland. The law favored by First Minister Humza Yousaf carries a prison sentence of up to 7 years for statements for stirring up hate. Humza Yousaf himself is stirring up hate against 97% of the Scots population. Yeah, he is the guy who got out there and shamed the Scottish for being too white. So that seems to be on the table. And here is Visegrad again. Belgian police arrive at the National Conservatism Conference in Brussels with an order to close it down. Farage, Braverman, Orban, and Zemmour were to speak. Police claim it's a public disturbance as left-wing counter-protesters are expected to get violent. So they're not worried about the right-wingers here, but they're the ones being shut down. They're using the violence of leftist counter-demonstrators to shut down.
If I can interject here, you know,
1000%.
this is the same tactics and techniques used by the Nazis in the 1930s. It's a historical fact. They shut down because they were against free speech, because they were so convinced of the rightness of their own cause. And this is totalitarians of all stripes, whether they're communists, they're fascists, they're Nazi, they're theocrats, whatever. They are so convinced that they're correct, that they're arrogant, and they feel that they're entitled to shut down other people. So one of the things the Nazis did in Germany in the late 20s and early 30s is if the Social Democrats, the Communists, the Christian Democrats, the Classical Liberal Party, whatever, other political parties, they would go in with 5, 10, 15, 20 brown shirts, and they would... it only takes one person to disrupt with a loud voice to disrupt a meeting, but they would go in there and kind of smash up the place, rough up the people, push, shove, knock over tables and chairs, and they would disrupt the political meetings of their opponents. And their pretext was, well, what these social democrats, communists, Christians, whatever, they are so wrong that they're not entitled to have their political meeting. And it's this "we are right" mentality. And so this is what we see in Brussels, right? If you got the conservative union or whatever, you've got Nigel Farage or Hungarian Prime Minister Orban coming together, and we're going to shut the place down because we're so convinced of our cause that we think we're entitled to shut other people down.
Yeah, and I think the people that are really kind of initiating this stuff are the activists, and they're going out there And it's the threat of violence to which the police are responding. Now, I do think they tend to favor the left in that regard, because the left has done a wonderful job conflating its politics with morality. It's
the same tactic used against pro-life groups at Canadian universities 20 years ago, 15 years ago, 10 years ago. Presently, the university would say, well, okay, so the pro-life group's going to put up their pro-life display. A lot of people regard that as very offensive and disturbing and what have you. But it was peaceful. It was not violent, and nobody's dragged there unwillingly and forced to look at it. You could avert your gaze. But then you get these people that would not be above pushing, shoving, vandalism, violence, and then the university would say, well, for the sake of safety, we have to ban the pro-life group and kick them off of campus for the sake of safety. Right. It was very twisted, because they're not looking at where is the threat of violence coming from? It's not coming from the students that are promoting an unpopular viewpoint. The threat of violence is coming from the counter protesters who are not content to simply counter protest, but who are going to use physical force to vandalize, property damage, tear down the display, pushing, shoving. And so that's wrong, because in law enforcement, you should look at what is where is the threat of violence coming from? You can't just say, oh, well, the whole situation's kind of violent, so we're just going to shut down one side. That's not right.
No. And they're taking the easy way out, which is the coward's way, by going after the peaceful people instead of the violent people. And in the case that you just mentioned, I mean, it is the threat of violence. So they're going out there with a political aim of shutting down the other group's speech on the abortion issue, and they're doing so under a threat of violence. And then the police not only capitulate to them, but facilitate it for them. They shut it down for them because they're afraid of violence. And using the threat of violence to achieve a political aim is terrorism, is it not?
It's definitely a form of terrorism. And I've seen, I remember at that time, at one point, I went with the students, and the Calgary Police Service had requested a meeting. And so I had two of the students with me. I was their lawyer. We drove to downtown to police headquarters, and I thought we'd sit down with one or two other people, and we get ushered into this boardroom, and there's no fewer than 10 different senior police officers, and they've all got fancy titles. And it was a big exercise in intimidation, saying that the pro-life students, who were doing what they're legally entitled to do under contract law, under constitutional law, under administrative law, they're legally entitled to express an unpopular opinion on campus in a peaceful manner. There's no doubt about that. And yet, even the police joined the university in the intimidation. And fortunately, we beat them in court ultimately, but it took a long time. And I had very courageous clients. That makes a difference too. It's the courage of the students. If they had given up and quit, it would have been game over. But they kept on, even with the risk of expulsion hanging over their heads. They went back to campus and set up their display again, knowing that potentially they could be expelled from the university. That is a huge level of courage that we need more of in Canada, to see students risking their entire future career, their degree, in order to exercise their free expression rights.
And that was back in the 90s?
The court action was, the court ruling was from 2014. Oh, okay. The court action was filed in, I guess, 2011. And prior to 2011, we had years of snarky, threatening letters back and forth between the university's general counsel and myself, and lots of stuff, before the court action. So yeah, court ruling was 2014, I think.
Okay. I mean, I understand the wheels of justice turn very slowly, but
too slowly.
Yeah, too slowly. But at the same time, it's still preferable to the alternative, which is violence. And that is what ends up happening. Like, warfare is really just politics by another means, for that matter. So, this is part of maintaining a peaceful society. And it seems like all of those things that usually protect us from things like a violent revolution are under threat, right down to the elections. Like the elections are essentially a peaceful means of revolt. And a bulwark against a violent revolution. But it seems that all of these systems that our ancestors built up for the purpose of protecting us are under threat right now. I guess, are we getting enough wins now? I tend to think that in the aggregate over time, things are going to turn in our favor. Do you see that turn taking shape at all?
Well, it's hard to say what are enough wins. I mean, we've had court rulings, the dismissal of Brian Peckford's court challenge to these utterly unscientific, as admitted by government officials under oath, these unscientific travel restrictions. And to have that court action dismissed as moot was just disgraceful. So no amount of future victories can really make up for terrible court rulings in the past. But I was certainly very encouraged by the outcome in the Justice Centre's court action against Trudeau illegally using the Emergencies Act. It was a real boost to morale. Mm-hmm. And I think it also sends a very powerful signal to other judges that, yes, it's okay to rule against the federal government. And courts have. I mean, the charter, April 17th marks the 42nd anniversary. It was 1982 to 2024, so it's 42 years. And courts have ruled against governments and against government bodies hundreds of times. If you think about all the different courts all across Canada, all levels of courts, you've had court rulings against provincial governments, against the federal governments, against government bodies, against law societies, against police forces. So there is a healthy background to all of that. Mm-hmm. And what we need to practice most are the virtues of courage and perseverance. Courage to speak truth to power. Perseverance is to keep on going, not give up, not quit. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's what's really crucial, because it's taken us a few decades to slide into this abysmal situation where a lot of Canadians don't know about, don't care about our rights and freedoms. That's the real problem. It's a cultural problem. And as you said, from culture, you get politics. From politics, you get law. So we have to revitalize and reform the culture and educate Canadians about why a free and virtuous society is better than a repressive regime, be it under communism, fascism, theocracy, what have you.
Yeah, it seems that the human species has a kind of collective amnesia where we have to keep going through these struggles over and over again. And so even, the GI generation that won the Second World War and basically gave us the modern era, like there's not very many of them left around anymore. And they were the first generation of senior citizens, as in they stayed active as citizens, but there's just not enough of them anymore. I tend to think that if they were still running things, that we wouldn't be in this mess right now. But yeah, so a lot of the people I think that kind of sacrificed for the freedoms that we had tend to be the best guardians of it. And like I said, the GIs, the greatest generation, they're kind of just not running these things anymore. So now it's our turn. It's this generation's turn to have to struggle through a massive crisis that is probably on the level of World War II at this point, especially in light of the all-cause mortality stats. And yeah, I really like what you're saying. Really resonates with me, because it is about the perseverance. It is about the resolve, and what they are doing is trying to wear down our resolve. And the minute we quit, I mean, it's all over. Essentially, we got to keep this thing going. It takes to protect our rights and freedoms. Like, it's a constant struggle. It needs maintenance. I think the default setting on the human species is authoritarian. Just take a quick glance around the world, and you'll
most countries, most periods of history and most countries, it's authoritarianism that prevails, and it really takes a special kind of people as well to have the emotional maturity, psychological maturity to be living in a free society. And the default. I mean, the Germans fell into this in 1933. You already had half of the population in Germany that really didn't care about democracy or was opposed to democracy. If you look at the votes given to the communists, who were openly hostile to democracy, who said if they took power, they would destroy democracy and they would have the dictatorship of the proletariat. The combined vote of the communists and the National Socialists, the Nazis, together in several elections, it was 50% or close to 50%. So you had half the population that actually actively disliked the rights and freedoms of the free society. So it's no wonder they sank into those depths. But we have to not lose our nerves, because my conviction, and I think your conviction and the conviction of those that are watching and listening, is that a free and democratic society where we respect human dignity and say that every person has a right to practice their faith, their religion, or if they're without a particular religion, they also have a freedom of conscience to live out their lives according to their deepest convictions. Everybody has a basic right to express their opinions, whether they're popular or not, the right to associate with each other freely, the right to assemble peacefully, bodily autonomy, the right to control what we get injected with or not, movement, travel, mobility, these rights to travel freely. That some Canadians have lost the conviction that this free and democratic society is actually morally superior to the fascist, communist, theocratic, repressive regimes. That's the problem. That's the problem we have with lockdowns. There were a lot of Canadians quite, cheerfully, even enthusiastically, gave up their rights and freedoms because they were just not convinced that the free society is actually better. That's the core problem that we're dealing with.
And it certainly doesn't help much when you have people like Larry Fink, CEO of BlackRock, out there saying that they prefer the Chinese economic model, and their whole ESG strategy is for the purpose of forcing behavior on all of us. So it does seem to be the case that I know a lot of people kind of bag on the young people these days, but they're not the ones running our institutions. Like the people running our institutions are older. They're, Larry Fink's age. So I think we're seeing a lot of these attitudes really emanating from the top. Even the university, I think, is basically, I don't even know that it's up for debate at this point, that they've basically been indoctrinating where they should be educating by and large. And it's not the students that are running the universities, it's the deans and the tenured professors. So it seems like the revitalization, I think, that you're calling for civic duty and responsibility is something that starts at the top. And
it starts everywhere. I mean, I absolutely agree. It's the people that are now in power, who are typically people in their 40s, 50s, and 60s. They're doing things like, promoting the critical race theory, promoting this equity, diversity, inclusion garbage at universities, in legislation, dismantling our education system and indoctrinating kids with various ideologies rather than teaching them to think and teaching them math and reading and writing. And so it does start, but when we say it starts at the top, I mean, yes, by all means, the current elected officials, who also tend to be people in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, more so than people in their 20s and 30s. So whether it's elected officials, government officials, the people running universities, yes, it needs to start at the top. However, let's not let that become an excuse for us at the bottom, who are not in positions of authority. Like, myself, I'm running a nonprofit, but I don't have any coercive power over anybody.
Right.
I'm not a government official or a university official. So let's not have that becoming this idea that change must start at the top. That should not excuse us from our own responsibilities to be on a first name basis with our member of parliament, with our provincial member of parliament. There's no excuse for not being actively involved in the process. There's an old French proverb that I think we should take to heart, and it says, if you don't do politics, then politics will be done unto you.
Yes. That is, I think, cuts to the core, doesn't it?
It does. It does.
Yeah. And since we mentioned the universities, like there were a lot of vaccine mandates that were pushed from the top again, with the various university campuses. And I suspect there are probably more than a few lawsuits out there with respect to that. But do you know if we're getting any wins on that front?
I'm not aware of any court victories yet on vaccines. It's just wicked and horrific. The Justice Center provided lawyers for two young ladies at Seneca College, and they were both single moms, and they were both in their final year of studies. They were both looking forward to getting done April 30th and moving on to a career path and so on and so forth. And Seneca expelled them both, and it's all of their years of study gone. And it's just disgusting that we actually have members of the legal profession that will go and advocate for these horrible institutions like Seneca, who are treating their students that way. Sadly, we've got a lot of judges. They just parrot what they hear on the news. They're not operating on the evidence that's being placed before them in court. They are just, well, I heard it on the CBC last night, so it must be true. This is what we're seeing, and it's a terrible trend. But again, we have to keep on going. If the Justice Center had not had these court actions, like for Brian Peckford and Maxime Bernier against the travel mandates, we never would have had federal government officials admitting under oath that there's no medical or scientific basis for the travel restrictions. So even when we lose in court, we still win in the sense of exposing just how little evidence the government has to back up its side.
Yeah, and I do think that there have been a handful, like Bonnie Henry, I think, had to admit as well that she didn't have really anything to go on in a court case in Alberta there, just off the top of my head. So
we got a victory. We got a victory in Alberta as well, with the declaration that the Alberta's lockdowns were illegal, and that brought an end to the prosecutions against Ty Northcott's No More Lockdowns rodeo and pastors James Coates and Tim Stevens. In BC, we had some success with the BC government admitting that there's no scientific basis, there's no medical justification for banning outdoor protests. So they conceded that point. But we have yet to cross-examine Bonnie Henry, the BC's chief medical officer.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I think I was under the impression that she had been cross-examined, but it's so hard to stay on top of all this stuff. There's just
there's so many cases going on. Yeah.
We had the same problem out here in Nova Scotia as well. Obviously, with the unscientific lockdowns, and some of the most draconian measures, I think, in the country have been imposed here in Canada, in Nova Scotia, where they were banning protests on the side of the road when the trucker convoy was going on. And then there was a protest that was supposed to take place at Citadel Hill in Halifax that, even after Black Lives Matter was able to run amok during lockdowns in the wake of the fentanyl overdose of George Floyd, they still, like the province still took Freedom for Nova Scotia to court to get an injunction to stop their protest. And I think they stepped in it at the same time, because now that they got the injunction initially, but the appeals court are the ones who are saying, actually, we're going to allow this appeal, especially in light of the fact that Strang, in his own affidavit, says that there's evidence of outdoor transmission, but he doesn't present any. So it seems to be the case, I hope, that maybe they've gotten out over their skis enough at this point that they end up exposing themselves. Like they're going to have to stand on this now. So it might be a longer process, but it's still underway, right?
Yeah, I'm actually not familiar with that particular court case, but something to keep in mind: people who thought that the lockdowns and the vaccine passports were a good thing, they should also be concerned about these court rulings, because it's not just the outcome that you have to look at. I could understand if you thought that lockdowns were, necessary and justified and good, and if you believe that they saved lives, and if you believe it was the right approach. Obviously, you're going to be happy when you hear that there's a court ruling that upheld lockdowns as valid. So I can understand people feeling happy about that, but people have to think through, okay, so maybe you were in favor of lockdowns, and maybe on the surface you like this ruling that validates lockdowns, but do you really want to be in a country where the government can declare that there's an emergency? What if we had some terrorist attack in one city, and the terrorists blew up some building and killed a bunch of people? Would it be okay for the government to declare a national emergency and say that government's going to apply surveillance to every email in the country to protect us from terrorism? And you have nothing to worry about, because you're not a terrorist. Why? What do you have to hide? You should be okay with police being able to monitor all of your emails, because if you're not a terrorist, that's not a problem. And so we have to think this through for broader implications. Would it be okay if the government declares there's a national emergency because there was one terrorist act? Does that mean that the government can then take away our free speech rights, place us under house arrest, prevent meetings? Because when people meet in person, they might be plotting and planning terrorist activities. So we don't want that to happen. So we want everybody at home. We don't want public meetings. We want everybody communicating by phone and email, so the government can watch all of this. In order to protect you from terrorism, we're going to watch every email. Well, and anybody who says that's far-fetched, I'd say, well, give your head a shake and look at what happened under lockdowns. It was illegal to have your parents over for Christmas dinner, for crying out loud. So these are the broader implications that people need to think through. Is do you want to live in a country where the government can declare there's an emergency and then say, for your own good, we're going to take away your rights and freedoms for your own good? And are we going to support that in future? And then, and do you then want courts that start acting like rubber stamps and say, well, the government said there was an emergency, and the government said that they needed to violate rights and freedoms to deal with the emergency, so I'm not going to second guess the government, and have courts rubber stamping that? Do we want that going forward? I say no.
Yeah. Ash is chiming in, for the greater good and convenience. Well, for the greater good, I think, is basically the justification for every genocide in history. That's got to be one of the most evil things that anybody's ever said, is for the greater good. And that is a lot of what we heard, like with the gradual erosion of our way of life throughout all of this. We just need you to take this shot for the greater good. We just need you to keep this mask on for the greater good. We just need you to stay away from your family, ostracize your family members for the greater good, so on and so forth. And just look at the damage that's been done to the fabric of our society over the last few years for the greater good. So yeah, you want to watch out for that expression. And I'll give you an example here, John, that I think has been kind of making the rounds on social media a little bit. People are pretty on guard right now. But what about a climate emergency, the likes of which Dr. Tedros is talking about now at the WHO? And I mean, we know that I know Strang, at least in Nova Scotia for sure, was just parroting the narrative coming out of the Chinese-controlled WHO, and that seems to have been guiding everything from the throughout this crisis. But now they're starting to spin up this climate narrative as a threat to human health at the WHO. So can you just imagine if we declare a climate emergency, then they're gonna be able to abuse these emergency powers again? Is that about right?
Governments never take away your rights and freedoms without providing a pretext. So a few historical examples. The communists in Russia, they took power in 1917, and they said, we have to protect you from capitalist exploitation, protect you from the evil capitalists. And so we're going to burn down your churches and exile you to Siberia, or just shoot you if you oppose the government. So no rights and freedoms, but it's all for a good cause, because we're building the workers' paradise. We're going to usher in this beautiful utopia where everybody gives according to their ability and takes according to their needs. And so it's all for a good cause that you have to suffer the loss of, your freedom of religion, for example. And then Hitler in Germany says, oh, look at these horrible, evil communists. Look at they're burning down churches. They're persecuting religion. I'm going to save you from the communists. Now, in order to save you from the communists, we have to destroy our democracy, take away your freedoms of expression and association, and the right to create political parties, vote in elections, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, once they were in power, the National Socialists also persecuted churches, not to the same degree as the communists. And then you've got people, oh, well, we're going to save you from the terrorists. I'm going to save you from the fascists. I'm going to save you from the communists. I'm going to save you from climate change. And there's always a pretext that is put forward when governments take away rights and freedoms. So it would not surprise me at all to see that being advocated for. And again, this is why you need to be active in the democratic process and let your voice be heard. Run for office, join a political party, be engaged in the democratic process. Don't be this uppity bystander that's just pointing fingers at all the scoundrel scum, when, well, that's taking the easy way out, right? Well, why don't you run for office? Why don't you volunteer on a campaign? Why don't you find a good candidate? And if you can't find a good candidate, why don't you run yourself? Why don't you run for school board and save the kids from this transgender garbage where they're messing with kids, 5-year-old boy telling him he's not really a boy and he might be a girl. Why don't you run for school board? Why don't you run municipally? Why don't you run provincially? Why don't you run federally? Or if you don't want to do it, donate money to a campaign of somebody who's running, put up a lawn sign, join the campaign team. That's what makes a big difference, because there's a lot of people getting elected with no opposition, bad people getting elected with no opposition.
Yeah, it should be a lot harder for these people to be able to implement their agendas. I mean, even if I agree with it, it's supposed to be hard. Like, there's supposed to be some gridlock in the Commons, but we just haven't seen that over the last few years. It's like a minoritarianism that we're living through right now. And you mentioned, I'll just throw this in here, but you mentioned the gender ideology as an example there, and we just saw the CAS report come out of the UK, because they did that whole systematic review of the practice across various clinics in the UK, and it came back no evidentiary scientific basis for any of this stuff. And it appears to be the case that all they've been doing is inflicting some of the most egregious harms that have ever been done to children in all of human history on their own kids. And pharmaceutical companies are getting rich off it. So it seems that the lawsuits are opening up over there, and a lot of the European countries are turning the other way now. But we're still digging in here in Canada with CBC bringing on medically credentialed ideologue to tell us all that, this is really good for kids, blocking puberty and the like. So we still have a way to go.
But you see change. You see change in Alberta, where Premier Danielle Smith, who is not a social conservative, and she said, we're not going to have kids going on puberty blockers anymore, and we're not going. And I might be misquoting that. I don't know if it was
16,
not under the age of 16, but we're not going to do gender reassignment surgery on kids. And this is from a premier who's not socially conservative, and well known to be not a social conservative. What part of the background for that was that a lot of people who are concerned about who love kids and want to protect kids from this, from the transgender ideology and the harm that it's causing to children. They got engaged in the democratic process. They took out a membership in the political party, and they're active in that political party, and that's what makes a big difference. You've got New Brunswick Premier Higgs, who has a parental consent policy there. In Saskatchewan, Premier Moe passed a parental consent policy. That is in response to people being active in the process. But if you pull out, you're going to leave the field wide open for some pseudoscientist ideologues proclaiming that this is somehow good for kids.
Yeah, and I think we see like pressure works is the bottom line here. The political pressure works, and we've even seen Jagmeet Singh seems to be turning away from the climate agenda right now, especially as it pertains to the carbon tax. He's of course using some weasel words to get away from the press and whatnot, but I think the pressure is finally getting to Jagmeet. So. This dam it's got cracks running all through it, and it's just about to burst. I think it's just a matter of keeping up that political pressure. And speaking of some of that, let's see what the opposition, controlled opposition in my view, has to say about Bill C-63. I'm taking this from David Craden, by the way. It's clipped into his show. He did a pretty good one here. It's just a couple of minutes. I'm going to take Pierre Poilievre's comments on Bill C-63 here. Here we go.
This would have been unimaginable 8 years ago. Unimaginable. It would have been unimaginable 8 years ago, before Justin Trudeau, to think that not only would he pass a law to control what you can see and say on the internet, but he would then put forward another law which could put you under house arrest or a peace bond under suspicion of something unacceptable you might say in the future. This guy, if he had read 1984, he would have thought it was an instruction manual and not a warning. Fortunately, there is an outbreak of common sense across the country. Yes, I think it was just yesterday or the day before, General Hillier said that the thing he hears the most often when he walks around the streets of this country is, "This is not Canada. We don't recognize this place." And that's what I hear from everything from fifth generation Canadians to immigrants who arrived here 10 years ago. They say, "My God, what happened to this country in the last 8 years?" Do you imagine if you had been in a coma in 2015 and woke up to this nightmare, how unfamiliar it would all seem? But the good news, my friends, is that life was not like this before Justin Trudeau, and it won't be like this after he's gone. And so he defined Canada and its nationality the following way. He said, "Canada is free, and freedom is its nationality." Now, Diefenbaker would later sign the Bill of Rights, and on it he would write, "I am a Canadian, a free Canadian, free to speak without fear, free to worship God in my own way, free to stand for what I think right, free to oppose what I believe wrong. This heritage of freedom I pledge to uphold for myself and all of mankind." Both of them believed in our ancient liberties, liberties that we had inherited and that had been passed down over 800 years from 1215, the Magna Carta, all the way to then and to now. Liberties that they believed for which they were the custodians. They were not the owners of that liberty. They were simply the guardians whose job it was to take the torch and pass it on, as Edmund Burke explained, a contract between the dead, the living, and the yet to be born. They understood. Thank you very much, Roy. Dr. Roy gave me a round of applause there. Thank you, Roy.
All right, Pierre. This is not a political program per se. I talk about politics all the time, but I'm not endorsing this guy. Not too bad, though, I think. He's talking about this sort of intergenerational effort of passing the torch. I wear my torch pin here for this is our Infinite Resolve pin at Veterans for Freedom, and it comes from Flanders Fields. It's the last stanza where he's saying, take up our quarrel with the foe. To you from failing hands we throw the torch, be yours, so hold it high. If ye break faith with us who die, we shall not rest though poppies grow in Flanders Fields. And I can't help but feel like, just as a veteran, I can't help but feel that there's been this betrayal of John McCrae and that legacy. It seems that our leadership right now is not interested in carrying that torch. What do you think?
The price of liberty is eternal vigilance. There is a tendency that part of human nature is there's a lazy aspect or dimension. There's a part of me that's lazy, right? That I have to fight against, and I suspect it's true for all 8 billion people. That what would be really nice is if we could kind of fight for freedom, like we did it in 1945, and we beat Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan, and so it was a victory for the Britain and the United States, Canada, and the democracies, the Netherlands, France, many countries. But even there, we had to keep on fighting because there was a brutal, vicious, big prison camp of the Soviet Union, where millions of people were living under the tyranny and not having basic rights of freedom of religion and conscience, economic rights to contract and to work and to invest. They lived in poverty and massive oppression, and so it took another 40 years until 1991, the Soviet Union finally collapsed, but even there, okay, so we had Nazi Germany defeated, collapsed, the Soviet Union collapsed, and so we would like it if we could say, okay, great, we're done now, right? And so now we can just focus on enjoying life, and let's pursue material wealth, let's pursue recreation and pleasure and hobbies, and let's just enjoy life. Okay, nothing wrong with enjoying life. I'm not suggesting we couldn't or shouldn't do that, but the war continues. You're always going to have your tyrants that want to oppress, and they're always going to come forward with their pretexts. We're fighting a virus, or you have to take away your rights and freedoms in order to usher in a new utopia of equity, diversity, inclusion, or we got to take away your rights and freedoms to save the planet from climate change. There will always be pretexts, and so we have to always be. It's an ongoing battle. Maybe it's analogous to health. Like, let's say that you're in really bad shape. You drink too much, you eat too much, you don't exercise. You've got a whole bunch of serious health problems, and so the doctor says, okay, well, you've got to stop smoking, drink less alcohol, eat healthy foods, and you got to exercise. So let's say somebody does that for 3 months or 6 months or 9 months, and they really get a lot better, and some of their medical problems go away. Well, okay. Well, can you just go back to overeating and drinking too much? Well, no, it's got to be a permanent lifestyle thing. So you got to do that for the rest of your life. So it's kind of that way with freedom. Like you never get to this point where you can go, okay, we can relax now. No,
right.
It's like a forever. You just got to keep on going, because the enemies of the free society, they'll always be there with their utopian plans, their utopian projects. They'll always be there with their pretexts and their excuses for violating rights and freedoms. So, anybody who thinks that this is like, we got to work really hard for, 6 to 12 months, and then we're going to regain our rights and freedoms, and then we can just rest on our laurels. Well, sorry, no, it's about remaining active in the democratic process for the rest of your life until the day that you die.
Yeah.
That's the bad news, is it's going to take that effort on a permanent basis.
I guess that's sort of that collective amnesia to which I was referring there before. It seems we've lost touch with that. Like there is a requirement for this eternal vigilance in order to hold the ground that our ancestors won for us, and that's why we stand on guard for thee in our anthem. Like that's what we're supposed to be doing is standing on guard for these freedoms. And it is the whole human story, that of the struggle to be free. And I like how you use the analogy of war, because I don't think that the war ever ends until the emancipation of the human race is complete. Well, that's not going to be within our lifetimes, not by a long shot, would I say. But we're coming up on the 2-hour mark here, John. So I thought I'd just hand it over to you for some final thoughts, if you don't mind. Go ahead.
Well, be encouraged, I would say, to anybody listening. We've suffered a lot of setbacks and defeats in the past 2 or 3 years. We've discovered just how weak the commitment is of some Canadians towards our fundamental rights and freedoms. That's been profoundly discouraging to see our friends and neighbors and family members, people we know at church, people we know at the workplace, cheering on the violation of our rights and freedoms. That's been profoundly discouraging. In the midst of that, we can take hope that lies have speed, truth has endurance, and a lie can make its way halfway around the world, and truth is still busy, barely, is finished putting its pants on and still tying its shoelaces. And meanwhile, the lie has already gone halfway around the world. Truth hasn't even started to walk yet to catch up. But there's cracks in the dam. I mean, these lockdowns were utterly unscientific. They were not justified. They were based on unwarranted fear mongering. They were not based on fact. It's gonna take years before that truth really percolates to the top, but it will happen. I'm convinced that we will regain our rights and freedoms, because truth always wins out over the lie, because freedom will always triumph over tyranny, because justice will always win out over injustice. And what we have to do as Canadians is practice the virtues of courage to speak truth to power, practice the virtue of perseverance and endurance, and keep on going. Because in the end, we know that it's better to die standing than to live on our knees. And so we will win the war. We just need to keep on going.
Well said. And I will say that throughout this interview, John, you've really been speaking my language. So I appreciate that. It's just really great. But here is the Veterans for Freedom website, everybody. So go to veteransforfreedom.ca and you can subscribe to our newsletter here. Join Veterans for Freedom if you're a veteran here, or support Veterans for Freedom by clicking support here. You have the option to donate to us directly to help with our operational costs, like my StreamYard account and the website, or you can donate to the support fund to help Canadians who are suffering under this tyranny. Everybody who donates gets a chance to vote on where the pool of donations goes every month. And this month's contestants are Chris Lysak, who needs no introduction. He was one of the Coots 4, who is now released. Lisa Robinson, who is the Heartless Pickering City Councillor, who was sanctioned 90 days wages, and she's a single mother. That was for standing up for her constituents. So I'm sure she could use the help. And also we have the Accountability Project on the board right now. So this is the not-for-profit that was stood up to advocate for human rights, and we're raising funds for public interest cases. People who want to engage in, I say, well, I don't say, James Lindsay says, embrace lawfare, like they're waging lawfare on us. So we got to embrace it. And also you'll have the option to send 10% of your donation to Adopt a Veteran this month. So all kinds of great causes there. Sign up for a monthly subscription with your credit card by clicking one of the buttons here, or send your e-transfer to fund@veteransforfreedom.ca. That's fund@veterans4freedom.ca, preferably with the audible deposit enabled. But if you're not able to do that, then please use the password Fund for Freedom. That's all caps Fund, number 4, all caps Freedom, and we'll make sure that gets us off to a worthy cause. That brings us all the way back to Bertrand Russell. And when asked how fascism starts, Bertrand Russell once said, quote, "First, they fascinate the fools, then they muzzle the intelligent." And I think we really touched on a lot of that. That was an underwriting theme of this conversation. We saw a lot of people, I think, get swept up in the fear mongering, and all the most courageous, most intelligent people who were standing up to this tyranny, they were muzzled. And probably the most egregious example being the delicensing of a lot of physicians. John, it was a real pleasure having you on. I really appreciate all the work that you're doing, and I really appreciate what you have to say. So thank you very much. It was a real pleasure.
Thanks for having me on your show, and have a great evening.
You too. And I better say goodbye to everybody. Debbie is saying thank you. Marion says thank you, Jeff and John. Very inspirational show tonight. Evelyn says take care all. Anne is saying thank you. Great to be with like-minded people. Night all. And JJ is saying thanks. And we got a couple over on Rumble. Dwayne is saying another good one in the books. Jeff, have a good one, everyone. Thanks, Dwayne. I appreciate you guys. And till next time, stay frosty and stay safe out there.
Won't you help to sing these songs of freedom? It's all I ever have. Redemption songs.